today's episode of the HUSTLR podcast, I'm joined by Ryan Sprance, founder and CEO of Kaihatsu Media, a digital marketing agency that specializes in developing your brand, presence, and reputation online. So they are a full-service digital marketing agency focused on developing brand awareness and sales growth through social media, optimizing digital marketing spend, and also in developing influencer marketing campaigns. So before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit of a backstory for Ryan. So Ryan worked full-time jobs until May 2018, where he got fired for running his own digital marketing agency as a side hustle. And after that, he doubled down on the business, and in a few short months, he grew his agency's recurring revenue by 7x to 70,000 US dollars every month. So Kaihatsu Media has become an A player in the industry in just a few short months. And in 2019, his agency is on track to do about 800,000 US dollars in sales this year. Another interesting fact is Ryan is also an associate producer for an Amazon Prime TV show, The Social Movement. So guys, if you want to learn more, stick around to the end of this episode if you want to know more about Ryan's backstory and journey from being a struggling agency owner to bringing in 70,000 US dollars per month in just 15 months. So thanks for coming on to the HUSTLR podcast, Ryan. So why don't we start this off by having you say hello and introducing yourself a little bit.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Sprance. I am the founder and chief strategist for a company called Kaihatsu Media. We are a digital media agency based out of New Jersey, and we have a focus primarily on the hospitality, resort, and entertainment space.
Right. So you mentioned that you got fired, before you started off this agency. So how does your journey look like transitioning from your full-time job, side hustling for extra money to actually running an agency full-time?
Sure. So my journey actually started in 2013. I was working for Apple at the time. I ran the world's largest Apple store in Grand Central Terminal that had 350 employees and over $250 million in sales. And at the time, the iPad was really the biggest device at the time, and it was on its way up. And the very first app that was actually developed specifically for the iPad was something called Flipboard. So if you're familiar with Flipboard, in the beginning stages, it was a way to put all of your sort of RSS feeds, your news feeds, your social media feeds. So rather than having to go to individual apps, you could actually just go to this one, cool app on the iPad. And they had this proprietary technology where when you actually turned a page or flipped the page, as they call it, it looked like the page was turning. And then over time, what happened is, Facebook started to pull the API, and these other companies pull API because they wanted you to go to the Facebook app and they wanted you to go to facebook.com. So what Flipboard did is they got clever and made it so that anybody can create a magazine using any content, and essentially you used it as a way to curate. And I thought it would be a great way for me to build my corporate career. And I said, this is a great way to sort of take the retail knowledge I have and put that together so that I could potentially market myself in a greater way. And then as a side idea, I've always been interested in sort of men's products, whether it's, ties or shoes or, how to shape properly or things like that. I had a significant amount of bookmarks, and I said, let me dump those into a magazine as well. And I woke up one morning and around Father's Day and found out that I had, 1,900 more readers than I had the night before. And I was like, hold on a second, somebody's reading this now. And I started to realize that we got featured on the Flipboard app. We were one of 6 magazines to be featured in between Harper's Bazaar and Esquire, right in the style section. So now I actually had people like reading this magazine, and I'm like, well, rather than me just sort of curating it for myself, I need to curate it for an audience, and continued to do that and built that to about 90,000 readers. And about 2015, a friend of mine said, hey, you should try Instagram. because what you do is very visual. Instagram might be a great way to go. And really spent 15 hours a day for 18 months studying Instagram and really trying to figure out the patterns and algorithms and what worked. Building up 2 accounts to, just about 300,000 followers, and did the same sort of educational process with Pinterest, the same educational process with Facebook. And then I realized I had this entire audience, but I wasn't driving them to anything but everyone else's page. So I needed to create my own website, which we created, thestylishman.com, and started to drive people to that. And through that process, brands that we work with, and I sort of somewhat fell into that influencer space where brands were paying me to produce content and share that content. Brands would ask consistently, well, how do you build a following? How do you use Instagram? And I gave a lot of tips, and that transitioned in March of 2016 from giving the advice to, well, you hire me and I do it for you. So we started, we had our very first, contract with a sneaker company that hired us to find influencers. So we had an influencer contract, then got another one to sort of run an Instagram account. Started very, very small, on the recurring revenue side, around $1,000 a month, and built that up, to where it is today, where, in this calendar year, we'll do just over $1 million. But had that going as a side hustle for quite some time. And I had the plan of leaving my corporate job. And this was in around May of 2018. And I actually knew that I was probably about 2 weeks out from leaving. Every day I'd come in and write on a Post-it note how many actual work days I had left, and I'd put it on my desk. And then I saw that the corporate lawyer for the company I worked for looked at my LinkedIn page and must have communicated that to the CEO of that company. And the next day I walked in and I was fired from that job, which to me was the most exciting moment, which to them must have been the weirdest firing of their life, because I was like, wow, this is the greatest thing. Thank you so much. And I walked out of the office on May 1st, 2018. It was a beautiful 72-degree day. I walked down to a Regis, shared office space, took a conference call with a client, and never looked back.
So, really interesting story that you have there. You wanted to leave your job, but so I'm assuming that company that you work for had a no side hustle kind of policy or something like that.
Well, listen, I mean, they may have. It was definitely not something that was communicated, but it's not really about them. I mean, the job that I had was an extremely boring corporate role. It was a very well-paying job, but it was just a miserable environment, and it's not exactly anything that I would ever encourage somebody to do. So I found myself, prior to doing what I do today, taking jobs and putting myself in situations just for a paycheck and a stable paycheck with a company. And, I think a lot of people do that, where you want that stability, as you get a little bit older. I'm 46 today. I was like 44, I guess, when I was let go. So you look at that and you go, wow, 44 years old, you're making more money in a corporate job than you've ever made in your life, toe the line, do the right thing. But I wasn't at all passionate about it. And I knew I had a greater calling, and I knew I had a lot to offer the space, because I had developed expertise over time.
Right. So let's rewind a little bit and talk about, how did you get your first paying clients when you just started this hustle? Like, just a little bit in depth.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. It was a sneaker company, and I'll tell you the name of the sneaker company. It was a company called Koyo, which is a pretty successful company now. It was founded by two German guys that live in Brooklyn, and they growing up, they're friends, and what they realized is that they love to spend money on high-end sneakers, like Gucci, Prada sneakers that were, up in the $1,000 range. And these guys were very bright. They went to Wharton, and they reverse engineered the process of making these sneakers, right? So they would watch videos and see a factory or a machine and then figure out who actually had that machine, and then kind of reverse engineered going to Italy to find the factories that make the sneakers for the designer brands, and struck a deal with them to use the same hides and use the same exact factories, but produce them at a more reasonable price. And they're producing them for, in the $200 to $300 range. I had been connected with someone who was on their board, and he recommended that I go and meet with them just from a sort of stylish man influencer space. And, when I walked in their little office in Brooklyn at the time, and, I think they're far more successful now, they gifted me a pair of shoes, which I still wear because they're gorgeous. And they were like, here's what we want to accomplish. How can you help us? And that's what I said. You hire me to run this program for you. And I had known a lot of, influencers because we kind of grew up in the space. A lot of us would work together on kind of sharing each other's content and trying to figure out the process of how this thing worked. So I knew like that I could get, 10 people to promote these shoes. So, we made an offer. I think it was like for $7,500, and they came back and said, well, we've got 5,000. And we said, okay, well, I'll do it for 5,000. So we took on the first paying client at $5,000 was the total. Wasn't a recurring revenue deal. It was just $5,000, and went out and found them 30 influencers, and, managed that process, created content, and had a pretty successful program with them.
Right. So how did your business build on that to get your, second and third clients?
Yeah, to be frank, I really didn't at the time have the intention of building that. I think I was still focused on the publishing side, the stylish man publishing side of that, and the influencer side. And I'm still trying to, work out deals with brands to publish content and, create and publish content through our magazine, but then also on our social pages. So I took and there must have been about a year and a half or a year there where I didn't really seek out any additional clients in that space. And then I got an email, a sort of a very random email from a gentleman who is the lead investor at a venture capital firm. And they're actually a very successful firm. And it looked like a crazy email because it was all lowercase, and I had no idea who this person was. I was probably like 1 second away from deleting it, and then Googled his name and saw, wow, this is a real player. And he said, come to my office. And I sat with him, and he explained all the brands they had, and he said, how can you help? And there was one brand in particular. I said, I think we can move the needle for these guys because I think they're somewhat in our wheelhouse. And he introduced me to the CEO and founder of that company, and said, you got to give them a shot to work with you guys. And that was our first actual recurring revenue client. And we took them on at $1,000 a month. And we were solely just kind of running their Instagram page and curating content and filtering it and writing captions and really trying to drive the follower base for them.
Right. So it seems to me that, your journey into this space is fairly accidental, for at least your first two clients. So fast forward today, you have a full-fledged business. What has changed in your client acquisition process?
So, if I'm being completely frank, we still struggle on the sales funnel process. What we're good at, what we're very good at, is executing for clients to the degree that the clients tell other people, whether it's in one organization that has, I could give you a couple examples too, but, we had gotten into our first resort, and it was to really support them from a strategic perspective. They had social media people on site, but we were really guiding them and helping them with ad creation and Facebook ads. And that turned into another resort, which turned into a large resort, management company. And we really tried to do good work. And as we did good work, we got more and more referrals. One person leaves one company and goes to another, and that they happen to be looking for, a website and a Shopify store, and then we would go and pitch it and get that work. So, from that sort of accidental, you're right there by saying that, from that accidental initial stage, we probably got into accidental services as well, because we started to, incorporate additional services into the business. I think the biggest thing that's changed is really from the operational perspective of going from me doing everything 100% myself to really identifying that I need support and figuring out how to afford that support. But then also the biggest piece of that, it had to delegate to that support, because, when you build it from the ground up, it's very hard to hand off certain pieces of it, at least in the beginning. You almost feel like, oh, no one can do it but me, and how do I hand this stuff off? It's weird, because when you're in a corporate job in a management role, that's very easy. It's very easy to say, here are the tasks, here are my staff, and kind of go run with it. But when you kind of take the first account and you grow it and you're really building, you're doing everything every day, and now you've got a person that you've hired to help you, you almost kind of don't know what to give them. So I think the biggest change for me was really understanding that I needed to do that. And I hired the first person to help. And, she was like, you got to give me more work. Like, you're not giving me enough work. Originally, I hired her as like on a freelance hourly basis. And, that big shift for me, when it was like, okay, I need to bring somebody on full time. I need to give them a lot of autonomy in this space, because then I can start to expand our services. But so since then we've added, we've got a director of operations, we've got a chief operating officer and general counsel, we've got a head of technical development, and we have a creative director. So I've got, executives under me, but then they also have a team where that's needed. They've got people on the fan engagement side, Facebook ad side, things like that. But it's taken a while to kind of get to that stage. 9 months ago, I really would have tried to do everything myself.
So 9 months ago, you were a one-man show. And how big is your team now?
So we have 8 people in multiple countries. So we have our head of technical development is based out of India. Our fan engagement team is based out of the Philippines. These are all full-time employees. We have one person. Our chief operating officer is based out of Manhattan, and our director of operations is based out of Pennsylvania. And we're 100% remote.
So how do you guys, communicate with each other?
So we use lots of different SaaS products, and more recently, we started to do a weekly executive team call on Zoom. So it's a video call. Everyone gets on and kind of, I give a state of the union and update everyone on kind of where I'm at with, growing the business and where the business is. And then each executive goes through, what it is that they've got on their plate and what they're working on and some of the challenges. And then we kind of try to set some goals from there. We also use Slack very heavily as a way to kind of manage that day-to-day, communication. I use Slack, to be honest, in a very voyeuristic way. I don't go on Slack to communicate with my team. I usually do that through either calls or text. But from a voyeuristic approach, on my watch and phone, I can see all of the communication that's happening between the team. So, if they're like right now, I know we're buzzing because we're going live with promotions for one particular website, and that has to change. So I can see constant communication between our head of operations and our technical team. And we also use monday.com from a project manager perspective. That's been very helpful for us. I would say those are probably the 3 main ones, right? So Zoom, Monday, and Slack.
Okay, I've never heard of Monday, so I'll probably have to check it out.
Yeah, Monday's great. Monday's great. We've used that. We've also turned on some of our clients to use that in a big way.
I see. So what kind of culture do you instill into the company? Everyone's remote. You guys probably have never met each other physically, I think. So how do you, build the culture that you want within your company?
So that's an interesting one, right? Because having been in the corporate world for 20 something years and wanting to voluntarily get out of it because of things that you realize that you just hate about working for other people, There's just a couple different things. Number one, um, I think you have to pay very well. I think you have to pay fairly. Okay. In addition to paying people well, we also pay out bonuses every single month. So at the first of the month, based on the success of the company and how well we're doing, every person on our team gets a bonus. And some obviously some are larger than others, but it really is reflective of the contribution that they put in for that particular month. That's again, that's the financial aspect, but non-financial things, um, I, I I manage by results. I don't manage by time. So it's not like, hey, you have to work 40 hours, 50 hours, or whatever that is. It's here's the workload that you have, and as long as I feel that the workload is reasonable and that you're doing the work, then you're sort of on par with the work that you should be doing. I offer an extremely flexible work schedule in the sense that, for the most part, people can, if they choose to, cut out in the middle of the day to do an activity that they like, they can do that. Because again, we're managing by results, not by time. So I'll give you an example. Our director of operations is an equestrian, so she rides horses. So, a couple of times a week or a month, she'll call and say, hey, I want to go on a riding lesson tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. And I'm like, great, enjoy it. And I think, first of all, you have to hire the right people. If you can hire people that will take advantage of that. But if you hire the right people that are well-intentioned, I know when she is riding, as soon as she's done, she comes back and she works and makes up those hours at night. And she does that because she's passionate about the success of the company. So really, from a cultural perspective, we want everybody to enjoy working with us. We want people to be well paid. We want them to be well educated. And we offer that. We had a conversation today where, we've added another account, and it seems like, we're at the point where, a couple of people on the team are a little stressed. So it's immediately like, well, let's get another job description written out so that we can hire another person in the coordinator role to free up the executive to be more of a creative thinker. So it's really trying to keep yourself, on the pulse of what's happening in the organization, and understand that, people are not going to work. Like it's what, nearly 1:00 in the morning here. I don't expect any of my employees to work until 1:00 in the morning because they don't have the same skin in the game that I have. But as long as they're doing the work that they're supposed to do and they're managed by results, they'll be rewarded for it and they'll be treated very well.
Sounds like, you have a great working culture and, and you have this focus on hiring like the right people. But have you ever hired anyone that, didn't really fit the bill?
So not in this organization, in others we have. I think part of that comes from almost every person that we've hired, we've first brought on in a project role. Okay. And that allows them to feel us out and us to feel them out, and kind of test the waters to see, do we like each other? Is this the type of work that you like? Again, you can see yourself doing, every single day. And when we test people out, most people have worked out. In the cases where we've tested somebody out for a project and it didn't work out, that project would end and we just sort of would not think of them as a full-time hire. But in almost every case, even our head of operations wasn't initially, hey, work for 2 or 3 hours a week and help me schedule stuff, which turned into, your work ethic is so good, I think you should be working with us.
Right. So let's go back a little bit, and I want to ask, what advice would you give to people who is currently working a full-time job but is looking to start a side hustle that could potentially turn into a full-time business?
Yes, there's a couple of things that I would say. The first thing is, and this is somewhat cliche to say because it's everywhere, but it is really true, is find something that you really love to do and try to monetize that. Because I think what most people do is they say, I want to get out of this role, this job, and this working for someone else. How can I make a lot of money? Right. And entrepreneurship is very hard, and most people fail at it. And there's going to be times that are extremely difficult through the process, and you'll give up. Most people will give up if it's not something you're passionate about. If it's something you're passionate about, you've got a fighting chance to be able to live through those very difficult times. And I would say once you got to the point where you created this side hustle that you loved, and you started to put time and energy into it, and it started to break through a little bit, not necessarily to replace your income, but you see that there's potential and opportunity. The next thing you really need to do is kind of plan for an exit. You need an exit strategy, and that exit strategy is mostly financial, right? Because I think the biggest misconception and the biggest problem is, and I did this too, is if you make a certain salary, you feel like you need to replace that salary 100%. And that is not necessarily the case. And I don't mind, I'll share numbers with you. At my corporate job, my last corporate job, I made $210,000 a year. So when you break that out, you're like, that's about $17,000 a month. So my initial thought was, I need $17,000 a month in revenue plus expenses to be able to live. Well, the reality is after taxes and insurance and your 401k contribution and everything else, you're probably making about $8,500 a month. Now that's a much more manageable number to get to. I actually read a book called When to Jump, and I read this book at lunch while I was at my corporate job, and I read it every single day, like parts of this book, and it was stories about people that did just this. And it was, whether it was completely something different, where somebody wanted to be a poet and was a firefighter, or was, stuck as an accountant. But one of the things I learned from that book was, kind of planning a runway, and what does that runway look like for you? So for me, I wanted to give myself 8 months, and that meant I needed to really look at my 8 months of take home of $8,500 and say, how do I then replace that? And if I don't have that today, what's my replacement of it? So for me, it was investing in myself. I was very fortunate at Apple to be gifted a lot of stock, and I took out some of that stock. I accessed some 401k, and I liquidated enough cash to give me 8 months worth of runway. And then at the end of 8 months, the business was, this won't be for everybody, but the business was, performing well enough. And I didn't want to tap into that. So I let the business ride and leave the money in the business. And I went and I tapped into my stock and my 401k again to invest further, into myself, up to the point where I was like, okay, now it's at a point where I don't have anything else to pull, or at least I don't want to pull anything else. Let me go ahead and start to kind of withdraw, a small amount, and the small amount really was just enough to cover the expenses, which also came with the third portion of that, which is, how do you reduce your expenses? Do you need that very expensive car? Do you need all of those other, things that you use, or can you try to limit those in a way? And once you limit those, how much does that reduce that monthly nut? And in turn, how much does that increase that runway for you to be able to get the business off the ground? And I advise anyone to do that. Like, you got to be the passionate first, whatever it is that you love. If you love basketball, create a blog about basketball and try to figure out how to monetize that. But that's the first component. The next one is really kind of figuring out what that financial runway looks like, and backing into that.
Right. Very, very powerful gems that you've just shared with us there. So there are two more things that I want to drill into. Like, number one, you mentioned difficult times, and number two, invest in yourself. So I want to, start off with difficult times. Do you have any personal stories to share, like what you've had to go through in this transition at all? Is there anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, I think the most difficult is, and it's not one particular time, the most difficult about this whole thing is you have to be able to have that confidence. And going back to when we spoke about, there's going to be those difficult times. One day you're flying high and you're like, hey, I got 3 clients, I got 2 more clients that are close to signing, and everything looks great. And of those 3 clients, one bails and the other 2 are upset over something, and the 2 you thought were going to close don't have the money right now. And overnight you can go, I went from I'm on the upswing to I may lose all my business overnight. And it wears on you, and it wears on your mind. You've just got to realize that you've got to stay the course, adjust as you need to adjust. Look at the services you offer and see, don't Gary Vee says, don't be romantic in your approach, right? You may go into it going, here's the services I'm going to offer and here's the cost. And then you sell to one person and you think it's now the law. Then you go to sell to 3 more, or 5 more, and everybody says no. Well, you have to change that approach because you realize that might not be the right approach. So, you have to be flexible. So I don't have a story, fortunately, of a really, really difficult time. But I got to tell you, the clients we got initially, some of the clients we got were just dog shit. I mean, they were like the worst businesses that you ever want to support. And you feel like now if you're running social for them, you're trying to figure out how to make this really uninteresting product interesting. And, that becomes, I think, stressful.
Right. Okay. So what about investing in yourself? Like what sort of steps did you take, to make that happen?
Yeah. So investing in yourself comes in a couple of different forms. It comes in taking care of yourself. I will tell you that the first year I did an absolutely terrible job of taking care of myself. Prior to doing this full time, I had a really consistent, workout regimen, and it was, 5 to 6 days a week, and the food was really, the right type of food. My bedtime was pretty static. When you make this transition, you usually tend to wake up, grab your phone immediately, get wrapped up in the day, and then realize it's 3 p.m. and you're still wearing your pajamas and you haven't done anything but just attack email and reach out to clients all day. So I think you've got to really focus on investing time in yourself. And I always suggest early morning workouts to people. And the reason I like them, and I'm not a morning person, I actually not at all. The reason I like them is if you do it, let's say call it a reasonable time, like 6 a.m., you usually are in there before the rest of the world is awake and interested in talking to you. So you can probably get a good solid hour of uninterrupted time before your phone starts ringing and you have to deal with, the challenges of the day. But I think there's other things that you have to do. You've got to consume educational material in the form of books and podcasts. I think that's essential. Video to YouTube has been a tremendous help. I've been known to purchase, courses when, I felt like I needed more education on something. Even if you are an expert in a field, you can't feel like you are the only expert. There's a lot of, consumption on YouTube of, ever-changing, social media challenges that are out there. So you can stay up to date. I think that's important. So it's a combination of on the higher end, maybe, the courses and maybe, some other, external education, but on the smallest detail, it's physically taking care of yourself.
Right. So I think I can totally relate to that because when I just started my business for the first year, I was living on ramen, extreme lack of sleep, and just horrible living habits, and that has really taken a toll on me over it took months to recover from bad behavior like that. So stay away and invest in yourself, keep yourself healthy, because in the beginning you are the one driving the business, right? So, okay, moving on.
Let me just add
Next.
something. Let me just add something before you go to the next question. So Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
The seventh habit was sharpen the saw, and it was specifically that. It was about taking time to rest and rejuvenate your brain. Albert Einstein used to nap in the middle of the day because he felt he'd become more refreshed after a nap. So obviously the world has changed significantly, and we don't necessarily have those luxuries, but yeah, just making that small amount of time to work out or meditate or do whatever it is that helps you center yourself is essential. And I really did for a year abuse myself similar to how you did. And I'm now in the last several months getting much better at that process.
Right. Thanks. That's that's very relatable, especially for early entrepreneurs. So, Ryan, I have this question that's a little bit more industry specific. Okay, if someone was starting a digital marketing agency from scratch today, what kind of advice would you give to them? Like you mentioned, you had like really dog shit clients in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So what could new agency owners do to perhaps avoid these kind of clients?
Well, I would say that the initial part of the advice is not to avoid the clients. It's to hone skills that are going to be to fix pain points for clients. Look at what those clients are. All right, so we'll throw out just a few examples, right? Let's say you want to support clients in the medical field. Let's say it's, I don't know, chiropractic or dentistry, and you're going to help clients get more leads. And you're going to do that through Facebook ads or, AdWords or whatever. Really understanding and studying that and knowing what is a Facebook lead form and how does it work and what happens when it comes in, and really being the expert in it and testing it. I mean, I would go to 5 chiropractors and say, I want to do this for you for free. And I want to test this out and invest your own money in the ads so you can see what works and what doesn't work before you then actually go to take that. Because now, once you know it works, you can take that with confidence. I also think that one of the challenges that people fall into, especially with agency work or consulting work, is pricing. It's like, how do you price it, right? If I go too high, they won't sign me. Or if I go too low, then I'm going to hate doing the work. Well, what's the middle? Well, you don't know what they're thinking because nobody's giving you a budget. So you're just trying to figure it out. And I think that is alleviated when you actually go and invest time to do work like that 5 chiropractor situation. Because if you go work with 5 chiropractors and they each get 32 new leads, and those leads converted into customers that have a value of, $8,000 a year for that chiropractor, you now can put a value on the service that you offer. Whereas before, you're just shooting from the hip. And then you can confidently say, hey, it's $4,000 a month or it's $6,000 a month. And here's why. Here's what the type of revenue you're going to get from the work that we do for you. But you can't confidently do that if you have no idea what value you're going to bring to them.
That makes a lot of sense. So on a separate note, in our email conversation, you also mentioned that, you are an associate producer for an Amazon Prime TV show or something.
Sure.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's that about?
Yeah, so it's a show called The Social Movement. The first season was just shot this past summer in Montreal, and I signed on as an associate producer to support with the second season, which is going to film in Montreal this coming summer. It is actually a really cool concept because it is a show that's set up to solve a real world problem. And it's broken up into various teams, and all of these teams compete to have the best solution to fix these real world problems like, anti-bullying or climate change or, really some social issue that's out there. And I think, really why I love it is that everybody wins, right? Because if one team wins, but five others don't, those five other teams created ideas which could potentially, solve a problem. So I was fortunate enough to build a relationship with the executive producer team, and we talked through what my support could look like, and was happy to sign on for that. So we're excited to see what comes of this over the next several months, but it's an extremely interesting project, and I'm really happy to be part of it.
Right. So what kind of resources or how are you contributing to this TV show? Do you have an idea yet?
Well, we're in the very early stages. I think the initial part is really to help help recruit and cast for the teams. That's the most important, to find the right people who are passionate about, changing the world. That is the biggest and most challenging task today. As that starts to shore up, it'll be more about, supporting the marketing efforts, and when we get down to the actual show, supporting the teams during the filming, and everything like that. But it's just like anything else, like the way you learn Instagram by spending 15 hours a day doing it. It's no different here. It's an education process, but I'm excited because it is such a great opportunity.
Right. So cool. So other than this, the social network. No, I'm sorry, the social movement. So what's next for you in the next, coming months or years?
Yeah, so we've got a very exciting project on deck right now. My agency, Kaihatsu Media, has worked side by side with a partner agency called 212 Group, and they do things digitally that we don't do, and vice versa. So they do things like data harvesting, which helps support Facebook and Instagram ads. They do Google AdWords, display ads, and lots of other things data related. We don't do that. We're more on the sort of creative, social side, website development, branding side. And we work with them on 3 or 4 different clients, but realize combined, our talents combined create an incredible opportunity for clients in the travel, tourism, resort, and entertainment space. Because if you look at what we do and what they do, and you put that together, it really is one extremely comprehensive agency that can support a brand new resort from soup to nuts, everything from, the initial building the website all the way through, conversions and bookings. So this month we partnered with them and essentially merged talents. So 212 Group and Kaihatsu Media will continue to exist in the form that it is today, but we've combined to create an even more powerful company called Awestruck, and Awestruck will be primarily focused in that travel, tourism, and entertainment space. So we're excited to kick off that brand and think that we're going to offer some incredible things for clients down the road.
Sounds super interesting. So how did you guys initially start working together? Like, did you guys know each other,
Yeah,
personally,
so that's actually the one of the co-founders of 212 Group and I worked together 20 years ago at World Wrestling Entertainment, which actually back then was World Wrestling Federation. He was on the TV production side. We reconnected about a year and a half ago. They actually brought us into our first resort client, and as the social partner. And that's one of the deals that we got. And then we continued to work with them on other projects. But as we work together, it's a relationship where we have to communicate every single day, because what we do affects them and vice versa. And the more we started to see the synergies of what our businesses do, the more we realize that we have talent on both ends that can support this bigger project.
Wow. So, you guys essentially work together to deliver a lot more value to your clients. Am I right? So I think
That's exactly right.
That's leverage right there, right? So last question for you, Ryan. Knowing what you know now, if you could start all over again, what would you have done differently?
I would hire a team faster. I would start to structure the company in a way, knowing that more people would be involved than myself early on, which kind of goes back to the whole, hiring people sooner and being able to delegate. I would say some other advice is to, begin with the end in mind a little bit, which is, you want to be able to look at it and say, what is the long-term goal of this organization? And is the long-term goal to build a sustainable brand that you could leave to people when you're not there? Is it to have it be acquired by a bigger company, or is it to just sort of sell it outright? I think had I put in my head that every move I make and every financial decision I make is related to this company being acquired, I probably would have made some smarter decisions financially in the beginning. So I think right out of the gate, you have to be able to invest in people before you are willing to admit that you need the people. Because by the time an entrepreneur admits that they need help, it's too late. And you've already lost business, you've already lost sleep or lived off of ramen noodles. So that is the one, real solid piece of advice I think I can offer.
Awesome stuff. So once again, Ryan, thanks for coming on to the show and sharing so much valuable insights, in terms of running an agency and being an entrepreneur, coming from a corporate background, right? So before we end this episode, is there anything that you'd like to add on?
No, just listen, I would love for your listeners to reach out. I'm always happy to help people. You can reach out to me at ryan@kaihatsumedia.com. I'm sure you'll link it in the notes, or follow me on Instagram at Ryan_Sprance. And I'm happy to communicate and talk to people and continue the conversation offline.
Awesome. So hustlers, if you like this episode, do check out the show notes, leave a review, hit the subscribe button. And if there's a certain thing that you want to hear more of, do give me feedback at www.hustler.com/feedback. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.